Howdy folks, I'm Hank Sheffer, and welcome to another true life story right here with Larry Hedrick on Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.
40 or 50 years ago, a person that became my friend in the early 70s was riding in the Superstitions, and he ran across an old gentleman. And after talking to him for a while, it was obvious that gold was not involved in what this gentleman was interested in. And he loosened up and told him, my friend, a story about some Lost Dragoon Pistols that the Army was shipping out west after the Civil War. And he had documentation. He had the serial numbers of the weapons. He had proof that the weapons had reached Fort Lowell in Tucson, and evidence that they had reached Camp Pinnell in Superior, but no evidence they ever reached Fort McDowell, which was their ultimate destination. So anyway, after I heard this story 2 or 3 times, I decided to investigate it. The documentation had stated that when they left Camp Pinnell, Picket Post Mountain, and they followed the old stage routes for 3.5 to 4 hours, and they were attacked at the Narrows. Well, remember, this was in 1871 or 72, and remember, I worked at Queen Valley, where Whitlow Dam was raised, and that's the Narrows. Where the dam is the narrowest place you could be in on coming from Superior towards Apache Junction. And so I went and I drove the whole route at 5 miles an hour and timed, and it got me just about to that point. They were attacked there, and there was, if I remember right, there was 4 soldiers, a sergeant, a packer, and a lieutenant. And all but the sergeant and the lieutenant were killed almost right away. And they began backtracking towards Superior, went over a ridge or two, and were cut off and took a northward canyon that was in a northward direction, is what they were saying. And the Apaches followed them until the sergeant turned and killed one of them, and then they disappeared. And there were 24 guns packed on this mule. They took that mule with them. They didn't want the Apaches getting those guns. Whether they knew that whether the Apaches knew that's what was in there or not, I don't know. But anyway, after they killed one of the Apaches and the rest of them had retreated, they stayed up there for several hours. And then they decided to hide the guns. And they said they hid them in a small cave underneath a large boulder across from a distinctive pointed peak. Okay, now we're over at Queen Valley. We're not talking about Weaver's Needle. And I remembered my trip with Hart Mullins to Bayou's Butte, which is a finger-like peak, but it sets kind of out by itself. The mountain behind it has a very distinct pointed peak on it, and it's very high. And they said across from a dominant pointed peak. So the Bayou's Butte area is where I think that these guns were buried. In the wash, because the road didn't exist. Now you drive up there, you go right by Bayou's Peak because there's a road there. It's not much of a road, but it's drivable. But they would have been taking the wash and the wash kind of curves away from Bayou's Butte at that point in time. Well, but this is exactly what the guns would have looked like. 24 of them, 12 in each box on each side of the mule. And this is what they hid. And they were probably wrapped and greased. So, you know, they would sustain for quite some time being buried in a place where maybe water wouldn't get to them. I don't remember the year that I started researching this. I didn't necessarily think that I was going to find them. I was just curious about everybody was thinking Weaver's Needle again and all that kind of stuff, and there's no way. The Army didn't go through the mountains with that small number of people. The stage route came right through the Narrows at Queen Valley. In fact, about a half a mile before the Narrows, where the dam is, to the east, was a stage depot. And in the 50s, I saw what was remaining of that depot. People had tore it all apart using metal detectors and stuff like that. Today, there's no trace of it. Just like there's no trace of those arrestas anymore out at Bluff Springs Mountain. So I think it was about 2006 or 7, a highway patrolman come out to see me at the museum. He was retired, and he was from up north. And he'd heard about this thing, and he wanted information. I gave him every detail that I could know. And he's living in a trailer court in Mesa. He still comes down here during the winter. He's a winter visitor. And he got some guys from his court, and he went out there, and they found a cave underneath a boulder across from Bayous Butte, the predominant peak, and they began excavating it. You couldn't stand up in there. Water had got down in there, and it was hard as, the dirt was hard as a rock. And they dug until the ceiling of the rocks in the ceiling were starting to come down, and they had to quit. Now, I don't know that they've actually got the right cave, but I don't know that they'll ever go back. But I am absolutely convinced this is the area where those guns were lost.
Well, we are out here to talk more about the Dragoon Pistols with Larry Hedrick here by my side. And we're down, I don't know if you'd say in the shadow of, but we're by Whitlow Dam. Some Black Angus here behind us. This is nice because we don't have to pay them anything for being on here. And so we're on our way out there. We thought we'd stop here and let Larry give a little bit of the history of the area that we're in right now, because this is a part of your past,
yes,
right here. So why don't you tell us where we're at and what you did out here?
Okay, well, you know, I went into the Army right out of high school, and my dad sold our farm in Kansas and retired out here. And when my active service was over, I didn't have a home. so I came out here to see Dad, and he was living at the Anchor P Trailer Court in Higley and Maine in East Mesa. And it was owned by a fellow named Pete Allen. And Pete was a retired Navy guy, and he had purchased the homestead of Hart Mullins, which was homesteaded in 1915. And the only house in the whole valley was the rock house that Hart had built, probably with his brother Jesse. Mm-hmm. Hart's dad was a stagecoach driver from Superior to Florence. And Pete, you know, he knew I had just got out of the service and wasn't doing anything, and he said he needed some help. Would I work for him? And I agreed. And he was running some cattle out here, and he wanted me to keep an eye on these cattle. There were a lot of mountain lions in this area at the time. And in fact, some of the ranchers off over to the east had dogs, and they organized mountain lion hunts on a regular basis. And you know, the other thing he wanted me to do was Pete knew that Whitlow Dam was going to be built, and in order to maintain water rights, the ditch, the irrigation ditch that Hart Mullins had dug himself, had to be maintained in a way that would carry water. And we're standing next to that ditch today. And he took me down. He said, "We'll start at the Narrows." And that's just about where we are now, the dam in the background.
Now you have a book.
I have a book.
That where it talks about the Narrows.
This was written in 1974 by Bob Garman. And I bought this in 1976 and read it. And there was an article a page in there that mentions supplies would be available, a place called the Narrows along Queen Creek where the flood control dam is, and commonly called the Narrows. Well, I didn't know anything about the Lost Dragoon Pistols at that time, but when I read the story, the story was published in 3 different parts in a newspaper, written by a friend of mine, and it never mentioned anything until the last part of it. It mentioned the Narrows. So I knew exactly where we were talking about. Everybody, you know, the story told about a dominant pointed peak, which everybody thinks was Weaver's Needle. And they were attacked right here where that dam is by the Apaches. They never made it anywhere near Weaver's Needle.
Yeah, Weaver's Needle is over here, quite a ways from where we're at. We're in back of the main mountain.
Right.
And you pointed out we're nowhere near that.
Nowhere. Well, at least 5 miles.
Yeah.
And the ditch here has been opened up by machinery since, I didn't even know it was this wide now, but it was only about 2.5 feet wide and about this tall. Mm-hmm. And runoff from the hillsides had broken some of the walls down and backfilled the ditch. And he put me to, you know, this thing is at least a half a mile long. And he put me out here cleaning out that ditch and repairing the walls. Thank you. And
they're ad-libbing.
It got to be it was the summer of 58. And I was out here the last part of 58 and 59 living in the rock house. It was a Motel 4, and they didn't leave a light on for you. I mean, we didn't have
Which is right over here. There's a big clump of palm trees right out in the middle of nowhere. It's beautiful.
And Pete Allen planted those palm trees out there with this irrigation water, and that's what ended up in the golf course. And anyway, he brought out 2 more guys to help me out. One was an Apache Indian, and one was a guy fresh over from England. And I mean, what a combination. A Limey, an Okie, and an Apache.
There's no PC here, okay?
The Apache never said a word.
Yeah.
The Englishman never shut up. It was quite a thing.
Well, that's a great combination.
But anyway, we finally got the job done, and it was an enjoyable experience. I mean, I was footloose and fancy free, and I had a big iron strap to my hip, and Pete had a lever action rifle in the rock house, and before I'd turn in for bed, I'd go out and fire off around to let the mountain lions know that, hey, somebody's looking after the cattle.
There you go. That and footloose and fancy free to me was something else other than being out here with a gun and some mountain lions. But okay.
But
good for you.
I enjoyed it, and reading the story of the Lost Dragoons, and knowing that this book had a common place called the Narrows, and actually working at the Narrows, when I read the story, I knew exactly where to start looking.
So when you were working out here, this was called the Narrows, is that correct?
Right where the dam is.
Where the dam is. Now, why was that called the Narrows?
Well, you can see by the mountains themselves.
Just the mountains where the dam is between.
Right.
Okay.
It's like a pass.
Got
you
it.
know, and this is where the military came through all the time on their way back and forth from Camp Pinnell to Fort McDowell. They didn't go through the mountains with small groups of people. The Apaches were
That
up
would be
there.
stupid.
That would be suicide.
But along the trail right in here where
right.
they went through the military trail.
Right. And the stage line.
So we're standing basically where, not necessarily this road or where we're at, but this is where the stage line would go through.
Exactly. Yep. When I was here, of course, the dam wasn't here. The dam was built in 1960. I was here in late 58 and early 59. But this is where Pete Allen brought me to start cleaning out the ditch that carries the water down to where the golf course is today. And it was very narrow, very small. You can see that they've backhoed this thing out into something amazing, and you can understand why. They've got to handle the water that comes down through here, and they can easily divert it back down Queen Creek, some of it. But they're trying to salvage whatever water they can now for the valley. And as I said, it was very small, but it was it was a long ways, and it was a lot of work to muck this out and repair the walls. And I can imagine what Hart went through. I mean, well, we just done it with shovels. We didn't have anything else.
That's amazing. Of course, now they've come in and dug it a little bit more, but how far did you dig with the shovels, you say?
All the way down to the rock house where the, just above the golf course.
Ways from here.
Right. It's got to be 3/4 of a mile.
Larry, we're here in what is now called the Queen Valley Country Club Bar. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of the place?
This is a rock house that I lived in the late 1958 and early 1959. It was homesteaded originally by Hart Mullins in 1915, and then Pete Allen purchased it from him. And he was running cattle out here, and I lived in this rock house.
Right here.
And there's been a lot of changes. They've re-stuccoed the walls. There was only the one entrance. They've added these entrances and the buildings onto it to where you can't see much of the original. But we're in the original room, and particularly the fireplace,
Basically,
which is
stone.
Which is also
what you see is all the original stone. They've just
right.
stuccoed over.
They re-stuccoed, and so this is where I cowboyed for a while. Well, anyway, you know, one morning my two guys pull into the yard. I'd never met Hart at that time. And then my dad come in. Pete Allen must have introduced him to Hart. And they were going to take my dad up to some of their claims. And since I was here, they asked if I wanted to go, so I went. And we went up to Elephant Butte where they had some claims. And then we drove over to Buzzard's Roost where they had some claims. Then Hart took us on up to Bayous Butte, and over against the main mountain, he took us to where a shaft had been dug in a kind of a natural, it wasn't really a cave, but it was a cutout in the mountains that was natural. And a lot of work had been done there by hand, building a trail to get to it that was cut in a cliffside and quite a sharp drop off. And this was the first time I ever heard the Lost Dutchman legend. And Hart and his brother sat there and told my dad and I the whole legend of the Lost Dutchman. This is 1958. And I got to fooling around down there, and I went down to the bottom of the cliffs and stuff, and I found an old wheelbarrow there. And it was amazing. It's not something you'd ever buy in a store.
Yeah.
You know, it was handmade. You could see the bottom of it had been bent over all the way around, and the bottom had been forged, heated, and hammered in together. There was no rivets. There was no nothing. It had an iron wheel and all that sort of stuff. And I yelling up that I'd found this, and they said, "Well, bring it up." It took me about a half an hour to work around to get up there, and they were amazed by it. And Hart was claiming that this dig was one of the Peralta digs. And he was saying, we're within half a mile of the Lost Dutchman.
This is just up here.
Well, off over here.
This way.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, they were amazed by this wheelbarrow, and they came to the conclusion that it was Mexican. And I thought, well, now, how would they haul something this far on the back of a burro, you know? Yeah. But then you couldn't have made it here. So maybe it was, I don't know. Anyway, my dad took it home, put it in his yard for yard art. He died in 1966, and somebody stole it.
Oh, gee. I was going to say, where is it now?
Yeah, I'd love to have it.
So that prospect is still up there.
Oh, yes.
Still up there. Gosh, one of these days we're going to have to go up there and take a look at it if we can. But this is amazing, because you say we're like about 5 miles away from
at least 5
Weaver's Needle.
At least 5 miles.
And yet we're still in the wilderness area of the Superstitions, and you're talking about, they allegedly say, was a Peralta mine behind us here. We're in the Queen Creek area. Not Queen Valley. Queen Valley.
All right.
Well, that's big difference. Big
Queen
difference.
Creek and Queen Valley.
Yeah, okay. And so you just don't realize until you get out here how expansive the area that we're talking about is. It's amazing. So we're gonna be going up and talk about the pistols a little more, as we did in an earlier segment. But this is amazing. Anything else you can tell us about this area?
Well, not really. I haven't been out here for years. I was amazed that they dug this out so big, but then, you know, it is for flood control as well as irrigation. And there was a well down at the rock house, and the cattle would come in every night to get water. And my job, of course, was to fire up he had a generator to run a pump jack, although, you know, it was kerosene lamps in the house. And the cattle would bed down there for the night. So it was easy to keep an eye on them. You didn't really need to worry about mountain lions and stuff during the day. It was at night, and these were yearling calves he had out there, so they would be an easy takedown, you know. So that was my cowboy days.
Well, you know, I'm thinking now a steak dinner would probably be good. All right, we're gonna head on up a little further and now in back of the dam. And that would have been the Narrows, or is the Narrows, where they put the dam, and that's where the soldiers were attacked?
That's where the Apaches attacked them, and of course they couldn't go on through, so they had to retreat with the mule that had the gun and work their way back over here. You can see Weaver's Needle off over in the distance. That is not the dominant pointed peak that the lieutenant was talking about in his report.
Well, we'll get a shot of that, but to show the distance here, but Weaver's Needle here, and then you've got the Superstition Mountain proper right there. We're behind it. So it kind of gives you an idea just how far away we actually are from the area where most people talk about. All right, we've got this peak right in front of us here, Larry. What is that?
Well, this is what I believe is the dominant pointed peak that was in the officer's report that he made up on where he buried the guns. You could actually say that Bayous Butte here was a pointed peak, but from the south, that is really pointed. And I think that's what they were referring to. Now, they would have been over in the Wash, which starting over here where we were pretty close, curves away and then comes back out up here. And that's where they would have hidden the guns. And then they went on north because back down the canyon, the Apaches could have certainly ambushed them again. They couldn't go back south. And they knew that the Salt River was to the north, and they knew that Fort McDowell was to the west. And you get up here about a mile or so, and there's a valley where the JF Ranch line cabin is. The Forest Service is using it today because there's no cattle grazing out here anymore. And there was a natural trail that went up a canyon to the left side of the valley, and you either dropped dramatically down into Angel Springs, or you crossed over the top of the ridge to Tortilla Ranch. And that's where they would have come out to at the Salt River. And the two of them made it to the crossing, which would be down where the Red Mountain diversion dam is, in that area. And the Apaches were waiting for them. They knew where they were going to come out. They didn't bother chasing them all across there. They just went around and waited for them. And they killed the enlisted man.
Yeah.
So the lieutenant was the only guy left to make the report. And I really don't believe that the lieutenant was from Fort McDowell. There's a list of officers in a book called The Last Bugle Call. He's not, you know, I don't think he's listed in there. So the packer would have been the one that knew where to take him. He was a civilian, and he was probably been to Fort McDowell and was probably waiting for him at Camp Pinnell. But he was killed right away. So these guys were out here in an area they'd never been exposed to. And they brought him back over here to find the guns, and he couldn't come anywhere near finding it. He just was completely lost. So those guns are more than likely just over this little hill here, buried in a small cave.
Over this way, too.
Over this way.
We've got Bayous Butte right here. And then you were talking about just down here below it, there's a mine that, and there's a lot, I don't know if you can get that, Dave, or not, but the thick brush right there where I'm pointing, of course there's a lot of thick brush, but right up there against the mountain, back behind there, you say that's where a mine is?
Right at the top of that brush, on the right side of that yellow area where that pillar is, down low here. And you go around, and follow the hill downward, and then you shoot back up where that heavy brush is, partly in the shadows.
Yeah.
At the top of that is a flat area, and that's where this pit was that Hart Mullins took my father and I in 1958, and this is the very first time I heard about the Lost Dutchman legend. And he was pointing out the 3 red hills, and as we came up the canyon, we saw pinnacles that looked like a part of one of the maps in the Superstitions. I'm not saying he's right.
Right.
I'm just telling you
There's
what
a
he
lot
believed.
of places where if you squint and blink a little bit, you can say that's the area. But there are a lot of the pinpoints here. You also mentioned the 3 red hills over here, and of course one of the descriptions the Dutchman talks about is if you go past the 3 red hills, you've gone too far.
Gone too far.
And so we've got the 3 red hills over here. And then I pointed out an area just south of us, on going back we'll see it, where has some distinct likeness to Peralta stone drawings. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but the priest that's on the Peralta stone, there's a distinct marking like that over here, a formation rather. But there's formations like that all over.
Right.
Even in front of the mountain itself,
Yes.
there's one. So, you know, don't know if you can go by that, but it's like there are several areas that you can say, well, that's just like the descriptions.
Yep.
So he may have just been putting us all on, but nevertheless, you've got peaks all over here, and of course that's one of the things that they describe is there's a peak. Didn't say it's Weaver's Needle, but that's what because it being so dominant, people think that's the area. But there's a lot of places that you could look, and there's mines or prospects laced all through here.
Yes, there is, particularly up by Iron Mountain. But the old gentleman himself that had all the documents and stuff that my friend had run across and was explaining the story of the Lost Pistols, he even thought Weaver's Needle was it. Well, we're so many, the Narrows, where the dam is where they were attacked. We're probably right now 10 miles from Weaver's Needle.
Oh, at least, yeah.
And they were attacked here. They weren't attacked over. They didn't take a canyon across there.
It doesn't make much sense that you'd be taking a canyon through there.
No.
That would be sheer suicide, actually. I would
Well,
expect.
with the Apaches on the warpath, that fuel of soldiers was just an open invitation.
Something like this makes more sense. And like I said, there's your 3 red hills, there's your peaks, and there's a prospect back there, and who knows what there is back in here. You just never know what's back in this way. And of course, Rogers Trough is just over this way a little bit. Just such an amazing area to explore. So many mysteries here.
Thank you for watching this episode of Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.